Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is July 12th, Tuesday, July 12th, 2016. What a day. What an excitement we had this morning. Camp is underway, of course, and also with it, for some reason, usually the lighter summer traffic has turned into twice as much congestion on the local roads. And my simple plan of heading out to the camp, which is probably about 5 minutes from where we are, 5 minutes back, of course, and then stopping at 7-Eleven for a coffee, since I don't have time to make it anymore at home in the morning with the camp schedule. And we allowed a good 20 minutes for that, and it didn't work. Took 21. So here we are with a late start to the show, with a little bit of echo in my earphones. Let's see if we can't turn that down a little bit and get underway and get talking to Greg Dworkin to catch up on the news. I finally have my stuff here, sort of kind of have a coffee here next to me. When Greg joins me, I'll be able to have a little bit of that. I got my keys on the desk, still started the show with my sunglasses on, smell like sunblock, feels like summer, feels like a camp day for sure, if you can remember back to when you were a kid. I am covered in sunblock, have the sunglasses on. It is cloudy, it is about 70 degrees, and the kids are headed to the pool. They always bring the kids to the pool in the morning. I think that's because it's either cheap or free at the local pool if they get in there before noon, and it's just not warm enough. And the kids really don't look forward to going to the pool because it's too damn cold. And what can I tell you? First world problems. 100%, all the way through and through. Okay, at least we got a place to go. Not that he wanted to go this morning. His good friend is not in camp today, and so he's telling me about how badly he will punish me by punishing himself by going to the pool, and I'll just sit in the chair. So I'm not going to have any fun because my friend's not there. Why didn't you let me stay home and play games and watch videos on my iPod and make you responsible for my entertainment? Having sunk the money, of course, for the week of camp. And, explaining sunk costs to him is kind of a difficult prospect, and especially it would only strengthen his argument. You've already spent the money. What's the difference? Why don't you let me stay home? I don't know. I feel ripped off at having done that. Okay. So that's the serious news for the day. Of course, we have an actual plan going forward for the show, at least for the second hour of the show. Mark Gersh of the National Committee for an Effective Congress will be joining us. This at the suggestion of David Neer, who, you know what? I probably should have set it up so that David had called in at the same time, but that would be awfully difficult for Mark to handle. And speaking to two Davids remotely on the phone with no video makes for a difficult thing. But we'll handle it anyway. Mark Gersh, very interesting guy. NCEC, an interesting organization. Not really, not a show horse organization, workhorse organization. We'll learn about the outlook for the elections in Congress, in particular in the House. That's the big question mark on everybody's mind. And go over the Trump scenarios and the various Trump scenarios that may net us some more seats in the House, but we'll talk about real prospects for what are we really looking at? Are we really looking at a chance for a Democratic win in the House to win back the majority? Maybe not. By how much might we miss? What sorts of things could go wrong on the Trump side to make them go right on ours? We'll find out what they have to say. And in the meantime, round up the news with Greg Dworkin. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm okay now, I guess.
Back from camp. Is camp all week?
Camp is, camp's all summer. We've only signed him up for a couple of weeks of it. He otherwise would, sit at home and tell me how bored he is.
Right, but in previous years you've done different camps, so that one week was one schedule, another week was another schedule. Is there some consistency here now?
No. We have this camp this week. Next week is basketball camp. That's going to cause a real problem. That's the 9 o'clock start camp. So we got to figure out how early they'll let me drop him. But it's
what
also
about the night
very
before?
Close. Yeah, you know
That would
how
just
to
make your
camp.
life a lot easier.
There's a tent. He
Yeah.
knows how to do this now.
Yeah. Here's $1. Get yourself a coffee. I'll see you tonight.
Yeah, basically. So this morning was not only dragging him out, but then, of course, we're going to the pool and they have a snack bar and I want cash, but all I have is 20s, so stop and get the coffee, give him the change. I'm sure he's already lost, $5 of it because I neglected to put the change that I gave him in a Ziploc bag. He's not really up to keeping track of money just yet, but so that'll be out the window. If we're lucky, he'll have $2 in his pocket and get a pack of M&Ms. So, all right. That's, I believe, that will affect the election. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Might. Okay, so we got 3, I guess, events coming up today politically.
Okay.
At 11 o'clock, we have Hillary and Bernie doing their joint We're going to be together, let's see how awkward this is presentation. It's great for Democratic unity. Happy it's coming. Long time in coming. Nobody knows what they're going to say or how it's going to look. So at 11 o'clock, you can tune in and watch. Then later today is a joint appearance with Obama, Biden, and George W. Bush, who are going to be at a funeral memorial in Dallas. And, important. And one of the more interesting things about that is that George W. Bush is far more willing to be seen with Obama than he is with Trump. And then later, I guess in the day or in the evening, I don't know exactly when, Donald Trump's supposed to be stumping with Mike Pence, who everybody is now assuming is the front runner for the vice presidency.
Amazing. Okay.
Losing, yes, is the front runner for having his career destroyed by being associated with Donald Trump. So, I guess Curtis LeMay wasn't available.
Right.
And the stand-in Mike Flynn turns out to be both a Democrat and pro-choice, despite trying to walk it back a day later.
Yeah.
So Trump actually said, I'm looking for somebody with political experience. That would be Christie, Newt, and Pence.
Yeah.
And so, it's looking like Pence. We talked a little bit about it yesterday on the show. The thing about Pence is that he's not going to steal the camera in any way, shape, or form, being as bland as he is. So Trump gets to do all of the camera stuff.
Yeah, I still...
And you have to hire a VP for the vice presidential debate, So
yes, right. Somebody has to be in there.
Somebody has to be there. And Ivanka was busy, so...
Right. I am amazed at this. It makes a lot of sense. That he would consciously get someone who isn't going to take the limelight away from him.
When you're a professional, thorough narcissist, you got to do what you got to do. The other way that could have flipped is he could have gotten a Chris Christie, who's always going to say yes, sir, and do whatever you tell him. Mm-hmm. And although that's satisfying, I think he can have a win-win because he can have Pence not steal a spotlight from him and still tell Christie what to do.
Yes, that's true. He can still be able to order him around, I'm sure, because there's other jobs he might be after.
As a matter of fact, in today's Pundit Roundup, today I have a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of it sometimes we don't even get to, but a lot of interesting stuff out there. And we sent a bunch of articles yesterday, so I don't know if you want to go back later in the show and do any of that, but that's the fun thing about the show. We never know what's going to happen next. In any case, there are some graphs that Philip Bump made of the Christie job performance in New Jersey. It's just remarkable. His disapproval is 64%, and his approve is 29%. And that's exact. It's not even, his approval was much higher than that. Back in 2013, his approval was something like in the 70s, approaching 80. And everybody was thinking, oh, if only he had run in 2012, he would have won. And just looking at him now, I thought that was a little overblown. But looking at him now, it's kind of laughable.
Yeah. Donald Trump had some approval in the 70s, too. I mean, the time period.
Yeah, the time period, not the ratings. Anyway, so a lot of mixed stuff today for the presentation. I'm looking at the GOP platform. Yesterday, they approved a plank opposing policies that encourage cohabitation.
Oh, well. Okay.
Because that gay marriage thing didn't work out, so now they got to give something else to their evangelicals. Also, the Endangered Species Act should not include species such as gray wolves.
Oh.
Just so you know.
That's the Dangerous Species Act. We should have a
the
different
endangered species, because basically they're fighting climate change,
Right.
The 21st century, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And Paul Waldman had a piece on that from the Washington Post, and it was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The title, for example, is GOP's platform fight reveals the party's big problem. It's voters.
Yes.
It's hard to remember the last time both parties had wrenching emotional internal battles over their platforms, documents that very few people read, and presidents never feel are binding on their own actions, but that's happening this year with both Republicans and Democrats fighting over what to declare, what they believe.
Okay.
The Democratic platform has moved to the left in ways that would likely prove popular if the electorate were actually familiar with the details: $15 minimum wage, aggressive action on climate change, expanded Social Security benefits, among other things. One gets the feeling that the Republican platform was done in direct contrast to that. And in some small ways, the Republican platform may be moving left as well. The struggle over that movement shows even as the party faces a catastrophic short-term problem, one Donald J. Trump. But it's still struggling with the long-term problem, how to make peace with modernity and social change.
Okay.
I have this flash of like the Amish sitting around at the Republican, platform committee, trying to decide these things. And it's not like the Amish are really nice and Republicans aren't necessarily nice, so I don't mean to disparage the Amish, but it's like, 17th, 18th century, Luddites or whatever, sitting around wanting to say, how can we make sure that we do not drag this party kicking and screaming into the 20th century?
Right. The platform plank against buttons, I think, was too far.
Or electricity, yeah. They really want to do the hand pumps and stuff like that,
Right.
Anyway, these issues are now at the center of an emerging GOP platform fight. In its 2012 platform, the party called for legalization of gay marriage and assault on the foundations of our society, and proclaimed, "We affirm our support for a constitutional amendment defining marriage as a union of one man and one woman." But a draft of the party's new platform reveals that in a major shift, the platform would drop the pursuit of a constitutional amendment that would define marriages between a man and a woman, opting instead to oppose the Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage and calling on the matter to be decided by the states. So, in other words, Republicans have gone from, he writes, arguing that same-sex marriage would cause society to crumble, to pleading that we just let them keep it illegal in conservative states. Which won't happen.
No.
Supreme Court ended the debate and a clear majority of the public supports marriage equality, but this is still a wrenching issue within the GOP, and there will be some resisting that change with all their might. Even if they fail, the party finds itself once again torn between two incompatible goals, reflecting the beliefs of its older white socially conservative base and appealing to the voters it needs to obtain a national majority. And of course, given that choice, they're going to go with the base.
Yes. Many of whom, by the way, are cohabitating.
Yeah, well, that's besides the point. I think they had an
God.
anti-porn plank, too, and let's just not go there in terms of that.
Well,
Put
but
all
don't
this
you wanna
together
talk
with
about that a
immigration,
little?
an
With
issue Trump cares about very much, and you have a picture of a party that reflects the views of its base, distressed by increasing diversity, uncomfortable with change, eager to turn back the clock to a time when the position of people like them atop the social hierarchy was unquestioned. That's not what the party, at least its more thoughtful members, wants to be, but it's who they are now, who they'll likely remain, at least for the near future. And, you got to consider that when you consider any discussion about Black Lives Matter and police shootings and such. Because if you come at it from the point of view of white dominant society, then it's going to, dare I say it, color how you look at this.
You dared.
Yeah, well. So there's that. But what's really going on is something of a bit of a disaster for the Republicans. Trying to get some of this stuff to load here, not easy, because every time I go to Politico, it crashes my browser. But there's a story here about Republican convention operatives and their desire not to want to go to the convention, which is pretty deep. I mean, you remember probably the best single comment was from Jeff Flake, who was asked whether he's going to the convention, and he says, "I can't. I have to mow my lawn."
They can't get away with wash his hair, I guess.
Right. The governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, apparently was relatively severely burned.
Yes.
He built some hot liquid or something on his lower extremities, and he perhaps won't be going.
Yeah.
But some other quotes.
Good
This
reason.
is from the Politico story entitled "GOP Operatives Dread Trump Convention." "This ship can sink without me as a passenger," said one party strategist. And there's some really great quotes here. "There's nothing to celebrate this cycle. I'm going because I have to, not because I want to. I'm there for one day of business," said Danny Diaz, who served as Jeb Bush campaign manager.
Huh.
"It's business and nothing more. What's there to celebrate," said Jay Zeidman, a Texas healthcare executive whose family has been a major benefactor. "The party's hit rock bottom in terms of leadership." And Jason Rowe, veteran party strategist, is the one that said the ship can sink without me as a passenger. So there's other quotes from there which are really kind of interesting. But the gist of it is they're really not happy. And part of the reason they're not happy is that they know they're going to lose. And, of course, losing never makes you happy. This is a piece from Associated Press, and it's called "A Lot of Holes in GOP Presidential Ground Game in Key States." It's one of theirs. Big story, that's what they call it. AP, the big story. So the big story here says presidential battleground states were supposed to be swarming with Republican Party workers by now. This hasn't exactly happened. State-by-state review conducted by the AP has found. With early voting beginning in less than 3 months in some states, the review reveals that national GOP has delivered only a fraction of the ground forces detailed in discussions with state leaders earlier in the year, leaving anxious local officials waiting for reinforcements to keep pace with Democrat Hillary Clinton in the states that matter most in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So they've done some great fundraising over the last few years, not this year, and put together a more robust ground game than 2012. But officials acknowledge the real competition isn't their past results. It's Clinton and what GOP party chairman Priebus calls the machine. Some examples of Republican shortfalls. Ohio Republicans thought they were going to see 220 paid staffers in May. They have 50. Plans for Pennsylvania call for 190. They have 60. Iowa's planned ground force of 66 actually is between 25 and 30. In Colorado, recent staff departures have left about 24, far short of the 80 they were planning. So they got a hold of a document that has specific targets, and they're just showing that in each state they're not hitting them.
Okay.
So there's that. And, of course, you got to pay these people. So if you don't have any money, that gets to be difficult. And that's one of the reasons why they don't have as much staff. So that's part of the picture. In addition, let's see what else we have to talk about today. A whole bunch of stuff. We have a nice piece here from Robert Schlesinger writing in U.S. News. Can the Trumpster fire be contained? If Donald Trump crashes and burns, he could take the GOP House and Senate with him. And that leads into that discussion you were going to start about what's going on with the House. House Republicans have launched a massive salvo against vulnerable Republicans, announcing a 7-figure advertising campaign aimed at linking them to their radioactive standard bearer, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
They've already started to run ads from them in various places about that. It's just like ordinary people talking about the fact that Trump is a jerk.
Yeah,
and sure, that's like a standard ad, but they're on the air.
Yeah. Well, they ought to be. I mean, he'll never stop providing material. It's not like you can peak too early with.
Right. Schlesinger reminds us that Clinton's margin in the polls is about twice Obama's lead. New poll out today from SurveyMonkey. They come out every Tuesday. It's a 3-point lead down from a 5-point lead, but still a lead. And if you look at the graph of that, it's just been incredibly steady. I mean, it's almost a straight line. Clinton typically has anywhere between a 2 and a 7-point lead in that poll. Doesn't vary. She's always in the lead. The line is so straight you could use it in architecture. I mean, it's just an amazingly steady poll. And the averages are still where they are, so, which is to say 5-point, 6-point lead or so. That being the case, you would expect with that kind of lead that some polls will come in at 12 or 13 like Reuters does, and some polls will come in at 1. Which is what Morning Consult came yesterday. In this particular moment, though, there's all these other things going on. I think we talked a little bit about Latino decisions yesterday. If I recall, if we didn't, That is a Latino-only poll that is clearly showing a huge and classy lead for Clinton at the current time. But the other poll that came out, which is of major interest, is a Bloomberg poll. And it didn't look specifically at the horse race for who's ahead overall, but looked at a subgroup, which is those with a college education.
Oh.
Now, the way it works is that if you are looking at the GOP constituency, particularly for white voters, that if you don't have a college education, you tend to be for Trump. And if you do have a college education, traditionally, you would be for the Republican, but by a much smaller amount. And so just in context and in comparing, Hillary Clinton, this write-up says, I'll send it to you so you actually have it too, so you can read it with your coffee. And here it is. That's on the list there. Hillary Clinton is crushing Donald Trump among college-educated white voters, a group Mitt Romney easily won in 2012, and one his Republican Party has carried in presidential contests for decades. White voters with at least a college degree, a group that represented more than a third of the 2012 electorate, backed Clinton over Trump 48-37.
Okay.
Latest Purple Slice online poll for Bloomberg Politics shows Romney won that group by 14 points according to exit polls. So it's always tricky comparing exit polls to actual polls that you're doing now. It's not exactly the same, but gives you an idea of what's going on. Among all college-educated likely voters, including those with postgraduate degrees, Clinton leads 54-32. And that's a much bigger margin than Obama's 2-point advantage with that group represented. And that was 47% of the electorate in 2012.
Wow.
So if you're leading 54-32 with half the electorate, you're not going to lose.
Not likely.
Among voters with just a college degree and no postgraduate degree, another subgroup Romney won, Clinton is ahead 48-37.
Oh.
So if you have a college degree, you can't stand Trump. If you don't have a college degree, you're in a particularly difficult position economically. Perhaps you find him a little bit more sympathetic.
Free college.
That's what his
now
base
we're
is.
talking.
Yeah.
That's why.
If you want to go. Of course, college isn't for everybody, but yes.
No, but clearly it should be for more people.
Oh, came across another one of those quotes from that GOP strategist not wanting to go to the convention. This is GOP strategist Will Ritter. He says, I'd rather attend the public hanging of a good friend.
He's a Republican. I think I would rather attend a public hanging of one of his friends, too, I think.
I agree, but, just interesting.
All right, well, we're on the same side, then. It's good. I like the unity.
Both sides.
Right. I hung both sides of his neck. I don't know. They don't even. I would be very interested to know where they have public hangings these days. But okay, I get the point.
Anyway, so so you have that as the background. Other things of interest. This one is a little bit on a different tangent, and it's listed there. It's by Jay Bookman, and he's an opinion columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And he writes, Dallas is what a Second Amendment remedy would look like.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting in that regard. He starts out by saying, here's what Ben Carson had to say Friday on Fox News. Now is definitely not the time to get political. Now is the time to use logic and ask ourselves, why do we have a Constitution? Why do we have a Second Amendment? They're always saying you don't need a high-powered weapon to hunt deer. The Constitution is not about deer hunting. It's about people being able to defend themselves from an overly aggressive government or an external invasion. Mm-hmm. And Book says, I'd like to make a few points about that, using the logic that Carson asks us to apply. 1, no. The Second Amendment is not about people being able to defend themselves from an overly aggressive government, as Carson puts it. No federal court has ever interpreted it that way, which is why it's perfectly constitutional for the government to ban or heavily regulate ownership of fully automatic weapons, bombs, tanks, mines, bazookas, missiles, or other military quality devices that would be required to overthrow the government of the United States of America. You do not have a Second Amendment right to violently overthrow the government, nor do you have the right to kill government employees in the pursuit of that overthrow, Any suggestion otherwise is, he uses the word irresponsible. I would use something that's probably not available on radio. However, number two, I'm pretty sure that Micah Johnson, the suspected gunman in the Dallas shootings, saw himself in exactly the terms described by Carson, defending himself and others like him from an overly aggressive government, kind of like Bundy Ranch stuff,
right,
you know.
Right.
He saw white police officers as the agents of that overly aggressive government. He acted out in real life the type of anti-government fantasy that Carson and others like to indulge themselves in.
Yes.
3, I'm not by any means suggesting that Johnson was motivated by the romanticized Second Amendment nonsense spread by Carson. He clearly had a very different agenda. However, what we saw Thursday night in Dallas is exactly what Second Amendment remedies would look like, and as Carson indicates, he's horrified when he sees it in real life. And if you repeatedly tell people they have the right to such remedies as a means to settle their grievances, if you tell them the Constitution envisions and justifies them doing so, and if you give them the means to do so, you trod very dangerous ground. That's his point. I think he's right. That
dangerous ground says, don't tread on me. It says it right on the flag. I don't know what he's missing. But yeah, that's exactly right. That's the Second Amendment remedy, and boy, do they love to tease that one. Between that and the vote from the rooftops T-shirt that they love to
plus
out.
all the stuff that the Dallas police force, who were very sensible people, said, this open carry stuff really made our jobs difficult. We couldn't tell the good guys from the bad guys.
Yes. And that's one of the sensitive points of this whole, that this happened in Dallas, because by all indications prior to the shooting, the Dallas police force was actually handling the protest, the local protest, very well, and had been pretty restrained in dealing with people out in the street, as opposed to in Baton Rouge, they were not particularly helpful. In other cities, less so. But Dallas, I think, was on top of their game, and people were very upset to see, well, of course, the shooting happening anywhere was a tragedy, but they were just particularly, I think, perplexed and miffed that, here, there's no reward here for the Dallas Police Department for having worked hard at handling the protest pretty well. I don't think anybody thinks that this was a direct comment on Dallas's policing when you get a nut who says, I'm going to,
no, when you get a nut, it's not
law.
really a comment on anything specifically,
right.
Because they're nuts.
Well, yeah, essentially that's it. And as more information emerges, I guess it's starting to look more and more like he was really way detached from reality. The idea of attaching him to any coherent political movement is, at this point, I think, out of the question for normal people. There will be people who insist that, this was all part and parcel of Black Lives Matter. It not only wasn't, but it doesn't appear to have been able to establish any really clear and lasting connection to reality at all, the more we find out about the guy. In other words, a mental health issue. For once, maybe, for a guy who isn't white.
Right. So we got some nice perspective here from Jamel Bowie, who's writing, Is America Falling Apart or Finally Waking Up? And he, lists what's happened recently, all the stuff that's happened. The killings in Baton Rouge, the killings in Minneapolis, was it?
Yeah, well, no, but nearby.
And of course what happened in Dallas, and writes, there's no context in which this string of violence wouldn't have had a heavy impact on our politics, but in this particular year, it feels ominous. Just last month, we mourned the dozens killed in a hateful rampage through a gay nightclub in Orlando. We've seen an upswing in prejudice and exclusionary rhetoric, and we had a presidential campaign in Donald Trump who condones and encourages it, all for the sake of this accidental campaign for president. Accordingly, the barriers we've built to keep racism and violence out of politics are faltering. In the international picture, where once-entrenched arrangements crash against the rocks of anger and bigotry, he's talking about Brexit, only adds to our anxiety, but he's also talking about the immigration crisis and how people react to it, right-wing governments in Hungary and so forth. Groups and individuals see opportunity in this, and they begin to stoke flames of racial hatred for their own gain. It feels in a visceral way as if we're coming apart, but we're not. This isn't 1968 when wars, assassinations, and riots brought our society to its knees in a way that's still hard to fathom. I'm a child of the 60s. I totally get that. Kent State and all. This isn't 1992 when another case of police brutality sparked one of the worst conflagrations ever to strike an American city. For as little political movement as we've seen on questions of police violence and racial bias, there are signs that the broad public, the white public, is waking up to the problem. Conservative writers like Matt Lewis in the Daily Caller, Leon Wolf, and Red State are conceding the pervasiveness of police brutality. Prominent Republicans such as Paul Ryan did the same, praising President Obama's remarks and hailing peaceful protests. Even Newt Gingrich, who once called Obama a food stamp president, agreed, "It's more dangerous to be black in America," he said. "You're substantially more likely to be in a situation where police don't respect you." It's too much to say there's unity in American life. Nationally, police officers are killing people as often as they were before Ferguson. Put the issue on the map, it's not enough to acknowledge problems of police violence. Americans, and white Americans in particular, have to agree to end it, which means jettisoning and views that equate crime with blackness and rethinking the role of police writ large. All you have to do is keep that image of a lone woman confronting the RoboCops in Baton Rouge.
Yes.
She's wearing a summer dress, just staring straight ahead, and they're literally dressed like RoboCops. They look like Batman without the cape. And it's just, the difference between how Dallas approached it and how Baton Rouge approached it is just worlds apart there. We are still at a deep impasse on the question of guns and what to do about the violence at the heart of our society, and there is the Trump phenomenon to be reckoned with. It's still true that his campaign is a vector for racism and anti-Semitism. Still true that he's proposed plans that would target racial and religious minorities. Still true that he has awoken and validated an ugly nativism across the country. But, the events of the past week, and perhaps the shared sense we're on a brink of sort, have inspired a basic decorum. Black Lives Matter has fiercely condemned the violence in Dallas, and beyond the right-wing fever swamps, there's no apparent effort to cast blame on the movement against police brutality. At the risk of indulging the soft bigotry of low expectations, this week has revealed the strength of American society. At the same time, it's exposed its most fragile parts. It doesn't mean we can't break apart, but it does mean that enough of us, for now, agree there's still something here worth holding together. And that's, part of the whole thing about every single time something bad happens, sometimes the reflexive reaction from the pundits is, oh, this is going to be good for Trump. Actually, every time it's been the opposite. It puts Trump in the light that does not flatter him and really contrasts him with a more calm leadership approach that Clinton takes. And she's the one that's benefited, not him. I expect that to continue because, they are who they are.
Well, they are actually who they are. We knew this. But they continue to prove it.
Sometimes we forget it,
Yeah.
So
well
what's going to happen
now.
in future? We have these events. We have the convention. We have the vice presidential pick from each side. Typically what happens with conventions and VP picks is the candidate who does this gets a bit of a bump in the polls. So
Yes.
Trump goes first, likely to happen with him. Doesn't mean it's going to be permanent in any way, shape, or form, so don't freak out when you see it.
Oh, we've seen this
If it doesn't happen,
Yeah.
that'll be remarkable.
half a dozen times in a row. They go first.
Yes.
So they do that. They get their bump. But,
Yep.
but if it's Pence, I wonder if is there no Pence? The whole point of him is his blandness. I wonder if there's any bump.
Plus his anti-LGBT,
yeah.
stance. The funny thing about Pence is that he's a complete, total free trader.
Yes.
Who also is on record as saying that trying to ban Muslims is hateful, hurtful, and anti-American and unconstitutional.
Now, where would he have gotten the idea that anyone was trying to ban Muslims?
So, it looks like a perfect match.
Yeah.
Because, Republicans are always saying this is absolutely unacceptable. Oh, you want me on the table? Sure, fine. Where do I sign up? He's obviously not an ever-Trumper the way Kasich is. And still interesting. And the convention itself will be interesting. So there's all of that in the background. Again, the three events, Bernie and Hillary. Watch to see who does what and who says what. I think it'll be interesting. And then I think probably he speaks first and then her. I think that's probably the way they'll do it. Then will probably be a very somber and sober event in Dallas. And then whatever Trump does.
Okay.
That's the deal for today, and thanks so much for indulging me again. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend Kagro X, David Waldman, back from camp. Hope you enjoyed your day at camp, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. We'll do it.
Maybe.
Yeah, right, if I'm not stuck at camp.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Greg.
Yeah, I hope you had a chance to have some coffee.
I
You're on.
did. You probably heard me every once in a while. Gulp, gulp.
I was talking too much.
All right. Well, that's okay.
You make it sound like I listen to you. Come on.
Yeah.
Knows.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I don't know what's going on.
I just
there.
cut you off. I
Here,
heard you
though,
gulping and just cut you off.
Before you go.
Yeah.
I know you didn't want to talk about that GOP platform plank about the porn, but I know you probably wanted to make some comment on how they characterized it. as a public health crisis.
Something like that.
Yeah, and obviously, I think everybody kind of perked up at that. Not the mention of porn, but the mention of maybe, but a public health crisis certainly.
Yeah, maybe they're willing to fund public health now.
Yeah, that would be an interesting turn for the minute. It's Kate Sherrill, and many of you probably recognized that language from the gun issue, where they refused to acknowledge that as a public health crisis. But I guess few people are trying to clean their porn. I don't know, and it rarely goes through the wall and kills anybody. I guess, but I'm sure everybody's ears perked up at hearing that one. So. All right, something to.
Here's the full statement. So the Internet must not become a safe haven for predators. The provision states pornography, with its harmful effects, especially on children, has become a public health crisis that is destroying the life of millions. The life of millions, not the lives of millions.
Right.
The life of millions.
Well, it's one life shared by millions.
Exactly. We encourage states to continue to fight this public menace and pledge our commitment to children's safety and well-being.
Yes.
We applaud the social networking sites that bar sex offenders from participation. Let me look at this again. We applaud the social networking sites that bar sex offenders from participation. Is that a knock on the Catholic Church?
Are they a social network?
I don't know.
Maybe.
I mean, what do they mean? We urge go watch Spotlight.
Yeah.
We urge energetic. Did you ever see that movie, by the way?
Spotlight.
Yeah, the one where the Boston Globe did the entire undercover but well documented documentation of what was going on with the Catholic Church in Boston, despite resistance.
I didn't.
Fantastic
You
movie.
mentioned it now. Okay.
Go look at it. Go see it. I encourage everybody, because once you do that, you actually get a good feeling about political journalism.
Good. It's about time.
Which reminds me of something else. But we urge energetic prosecution of child pornography, which closely linked to human trafficking. The amendment passed with little debate.
I wouldn't want to debate it either, although I guess I'd have to debate the public health crisis part of it, but thankfully that hasn't come up in that.
Well, they didn't do meth. They didn't do guns.
Yeah.
They didn't do things that are actually killing people.
Right.
They did this.
Yeah.
But, it's right along with cohabitation, which is an equal threat, right?
Right. Another public health crisis. I did notice that somebody pointed out to me, all the data says that the Republican base are the largest consumers of the pornography, which I don't think they admit to, but that's what the data says about, at least by state. I don't really know how you would. That'd be a hell of a thing. Now, public policy polling could probably come up with a way of figuring that one out, but everyone would dismiss it. But it struck me as another instance in which, if it's true that they are actually the largest consumers and they think it's a public health crisis, another instance in which Republicans are only interested in a public health crisis when they realize, I have that disease.
Hey, I'll leave you with some other thing, if only to change the subject.
Okay.
And that is, we were talking about the political press and the problems with the both siderisms and constant theme on the show. We were talking about that yesterday, but I found this address in 2011 because the piece we were talking about yesterday concentrated on some Australian journalists and how they approached it.
Yeah, right.
Lace sales. But I found this keynote address in 2011 that Jay Rosen gave in Australia.
Oh.
Which perhaps was wrapped up with this.
Interesting.
So I posted the last link I gave you there.
Cool. Okay.
I think if it's not, it's about to be.
Jay Rosen.
There it is.
Jay Rosen in Australia.
From PressThink. And he talks about
the
Church of the Savvy and the difficulty with both siderism. But he had this interesting observation, which I think is not often enough mentioned. From a TV programmer's point of view, he says, the advantage of politics as entertainment is that the main characters, the politicians themselves, work for free. The media doesn't have to pay them because taxpayers do. The sets are provided by the government, the plots by the party leaders, backbenchers and spin doctors. Politics as problem-solving or consensus building would be more expensive to cover. Politics as entertainment is simply a low-cost alternative. So he's talking about why things show up the way they do on cable.
Ah.
And it's rather interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I will take a look at that. I think they chiefly had him down in Australia because they like laughing at his funky accent in Australia.
Exactly, yeah.
It's
funny. It's funny when you go to a place like Australia and you're the only one that doesn't have an accent.
Right. They think you're hilarious.
Yeah.
I just
So
said
he talked about three
savvy.
impoverished ideas. Politics is an inside game, which is to say, all you talk about is why is Trump making this move, spending ads in this state, as if that's the only thing that's important. Not how is he doing in the state and why is he doing that in the state, but it pulls you in and makes you a inside person too. And then there's the cult of savviness, and then the production of innocence, he calls it. And the production of innocence, he means the ways of reporting the news that try to advertise or prove to us that the press is neutral.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
It's the both sides are isn't thing.
That's an interesting expression for it.
Right? The basic message, we, the press, are innocent because we're uninvolved, isn't something to be stated once in a professional code of conduct or an about page. It has to be said many times a day in the course of writing and reporting the news. The genre known as he said, she said journalism is perhaps the most familiar example. So is horse-faced journalism, in which the master narrative for covering an election is who's ahead, and you don't have to talk about, like, who they are.
Yeah.
So, interesting article altogether. Now, he's talked about this in many different ways, but there you have it.
Okay.
Meanwhile, it looks like the Dow's up 80 points, entering closer to record territory.
Oh, wow.
S&P 500 rises 0.5%, continues to chart new highs.
It's Pokemon Go.
And so you got to blame this on, Pokemon Go and Obama.
Yeah, I do.
By the way, I wasn't on the air last Friday when we had our Friday jobs report.
Oh.
It turned out to be a fantastically good report.
Was it?
Yeah, I said, I can't remember the number, 247,000 jobs compared to 10,000 the month before.
That's better.
Yeah, a whole lot better. So, a lot of good economic news out there. And that mixes in with Obama's relatively high approval ratings. And all of that's going to go into the mix of who people decide to vote for.
Yes. All right.
So, second time I'm saying this, but with that, I'm gone.
Okay. I believe you.
Thanks so much.
We'll see. All right. Talk to you tomorrow. Thanks again, Greg.
Bye.
Bye. And tomorrow, all show about the pornography platform. Plank in the I can't believe they got to that. Electromagnetic pulse and porn. I don't know whether they passed the EMP one. I don't know whether there's any fluoride one or chemtrails one. I think that might have still considered that to be too crazy, but I don't know. Republicans, you're so... Anyway, we can move on from there. Here's something flashing its way. It's all coming back to the porn plank. Flashing its way across the internet via Twitters. Well, let's see. I've got the Philly.com version of this rather than the New York Times or Washington Post version of it to save my clicks. Here's the headline. Jerry Sandusky, accuser. I told Joe Paterno, about shower assault in 1976, in our American bicentennial year, when they were minting those fabulous quarters, when our friend Marcy Wheeler, Empty Wheel, was having her school photo taken with the 1776 bicentennial flag in the background, which she uses as her avatar for Twitter. There you go. Just to put it in a little context. That's how long it's been since Paterno. I mean, really. Now, in 1976, we were surely unready to deal with this in public. I know. I mean, we're barely ready to deal with this sort of accusation now. But okay, I'm sure it caught him by surprise. It's clearly no kind of excuse for ignoring it, because such things did happen in 1976 and everyone knew it and would have been forced to admit it. But they probably, I will say this, they probably thought they could get away with covering it up a lot better in 1976 than you would think you could get away with today. But that only makes it worse. So, there you have it. Let's see, I'll just read this over. I don't know how much more we need to discover about Jerry Sandusky. The story is that Paterno knew for a long time, but Paterno is dead. So, I don't know how much there is in terms of ramifications from this, but Jeremy Roebuck and Susan Snyder are the staff writers on this piece for Philly.com. Are they AP people? Because the photo they use is AP people. No, I guess they're Inquirer staff writers. A man claims, that's not like a Game of Thrones guy. A man claims he told Joe Paterno and his assistant coaches the day after Jerry Sandusky allegedly molested him in a shower at a 1976 football camp, but Paterno brushed him off, saying he had a football season to worry about. According to newly unsealed court records. That ain't gonna work. I was shocked, disappointed, offended. I was insulted, to say the least. The man, who was 14 at the time, told lawyers for Pennsylvania State University's insurer in a deposition 2 years ago. I was embarrassed. The man later became one of dozens of Sandusky accusers paid millions by Pennsylvania State University. His testimony was released as part of a trove of records unsealed in an ongoing legal fight with its insurer over who should cover the costs of the millions of dollars that Penn State has had to pay to end claims tied to Sandusky. It's always the money that finally, comes closest to fixing this stuff, or at least, I guess, / prying it open so that the rest of us can come to grips with it. Always the money. Well, we can cover it up. We got football to worry about. Yeah, but the cash it's going to cost us in settlements. Sometimes it's the bottom line that does it. The documents include excerpts of depositions from accusers who say they reported abuse to Paterno or members of his staff in the 70s and 80s. That's far before 1998, the point that an independent investigation had established as the earliest date Penn State's iconic coach and other school officials knew or should have known about reports to police that Sandusky had sexually abused a child, which raises an entirely different issue. How in the world do you get an investigation that concludes this when it's on the record that since the bicentennial, older than these quarters? Wow. I mean, wow. Since the Jimmy Carter Gerald Ford election. Wow. Okay, before his death in 2012, Paterno denied any knowledge, so I guess he's in hell now, of sexual misconduct by Sandusky, one of his top assistants for decades. Paterno's relatives and legions of supporters have continued to attack any such suggestion as unsubstantiated. Well, it's substantiated now, guys. I had another word in mind, but it's radio. In a statement Tuesday morning, the Paterno family renewed that criticism. Too bad, you're wrong. The materials released today relating to Joe Paterno alleged conversation that occurred decades ago, where all parties except the accuser are now dead, except he actually would have, let's see, when did he make those accusations? It doesn't say when the guy said it on the record, but, well, all right. Well, so what? So he's dead. Congratulations, you're dead. I'm not really, I don't, so what? Anyway, that's the statement from Wick Solers, the lawyer representing the family. In addition, there are numerous specific elements of the accusations that defy all logic, really, and have never been subjected to even the most basic objective examination, including any examination by the independent panel empowered by the school to figure out what the hell was going on, I guess. Most significantly, there is extensive evidence that stands in stark contrast to this claim. The statement did not elaborate. So, in other words, beautifully written, but unsubstantiated from my standpoint and really everybody else's. It just says right here there wasn't any more elaboration. So, okay, they deny it. Big deal. There's all sorts of further detail. I'll allow you to read that on your own time. I think there's plenty more that we can get to, but just in terms of the news value, yeah, people are talking, and it looks like there's some trouble there in Pennsylvania. Other things on the wires, so to speak, today. Let's see. We'll add a few of these things. Yeah, there's the original Paterno thing, that one linking to the Washington Post, which has its own story about it. Speaking of Washington Post, David Fahrenthold, the reporter who's done such fantastic work on the Donald Trump, non-charity presence. We've got this now as a result, I think, of his work. He tweets that a liberal group, who I'm not sure, we'll check out the listing here, has asked the IRS to investigate Donald Trump's purchase of that Tim Tebow helmet with money meant for charity. That will be a fascinating investigation, because if they ever do it. Who knows whether they really will. The reason I think it's interesting is it will confuse Donald Trump to no end. I wonder whether there's two possibilities with that story. One, he understands it perfectly and simply abuses the system. Totally reasonable to believe that he was doing that. Two, also equally reasonable, that he has no clue whatsoever what's wrong with having done that. I could see either one being true for the same guy, same brain. There's a gigantic ego in there, which is probably colored by the fact that he's gotten away with everything, and he likely sees no difference and no firewalls between entities that he controls. So his personality versus his charitable foundations versus his businesses, they're all Trump. They're all Trump branded. He's the guy. He's the man behind it all. And he probably sees no reason why, if people gave his foundation, which is under his control, money to give to charity, he probably doesn't understand why his giving it to charity in exchange for a Tim Tebow football helmet makes a damn bit of difference. And there's a pretty good chance a significant portion of his base doesn't either. But it is wrong, and we've explained why. Last piece we'll try and shoehorn in here. Jim Roberts, reporting from, well, let's see, he's where does he report now? Consulting for the Hill. How do you like that? Anyway, gay GOP delegate makes emotional but futile plea to party to soften stance on marriage. Part of the Republican platform fight. Part that actually makes sense. And I bring it up because, we read the headline and we say, oh my, gay GOP delegate pleads with party to soften stance on marriage. That's not going to work. Why are you in that party? Why don't you leave? Et cetera, et cetera. And we're right. She probably ought to leave. But I bring it up in the context of our discussions about, well, maybe we're wrong. I'll just stop there. Our discussions about full stop, strike that, reverse it. Let's go back and say maybe we're wrong about these things, because think about how much time we spent telling people who wanted to leave the Democratic Party, no, you're wrong. You shouldn't leave. You should stay and fight from the inside. But our situation is hopeless. Well, it's not hopeless. You can bring friends to local meetings and win over local positions and try and make a difference in the platform from the ground up. Why is that not true for gay Republicans? And the answer is, I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It may be that the odds are just too great, and that I guess you can tell demographically, right? I mean, the chief public reserve of gay political activists. It's a finite number. We don't know what the number is. Maybe it's not finite. It could certainly continue to grow, but at any given time, it's a finite universe. Subject to growth, obviously, but the odds against bringing massive numbers to local meetings and working your way up, I think, are overwhelming. The gay political activists, typically speaking, find themselves in affinity with the Democratic Party and not the Republican Party, and it will be very difficult. You're limited in the number of people that you can bring to local meetings to fight with you. Although, well, you're not limited if you can just find straight Republicans who just aren't bigoted against the LGBTQ community. But that's also difficult to do. So she's got a much more uphill fight. But, so the dynamics are different, but the concept is the same. Why shouldn't she stay and fight? I'm just kind of curious about her story. I'll read a little bit about it, and why not say her name? Because she's more than just a gay delegate, Her name is Rachel Hoff for one thing. Republicans debating the party platform in Cleveland shot down an amendment to soften the GOP stance on gay marriage. That doesn't mean they'll never change. That doesn't mean she can't be a Republican for other reasons, right? Despite an emotional plea from the lone openly gay delegate serving on the platform committee. We don't know if there's any openly gay delegates elsewhere. Washington, D.C. delegate Rachel Hoff put forth an amendment to the party's platform that would acknowledge growing public support for gay marriage and welcome a thoughtful conversation among Republicans about the meaning and importance of marriage and to commit to respect for all families. Hoff urged the 112-member committee to acknowledge that there are changing views on the issue within the party, choking back tears at the time. So a nice speech. This acknowledges the diversity of opinion within the party on marriage. I don't know how diverse the opinions are. I'm not asking you to endorse my own constitutional rights. I'm only asking you to recognize that many of the Republicans who sent us here to do this work this week to shape the platform agree with me and should not be excluded from the party. If our party wants a future, we must be mindful of these statistics and evolve. She continued, we all agree about the importance of the institution of marriage. We're asking to join in an institution where your daughters, your sons, your neighbors, colleagues, and the couples that sit next to you in church. Freedom means freedom from everyone. It should mean for, I think, everyone, including gays and lesbians. The proposal was overwhelmingly defeated after almost no debate. So there you go. Should she stay and fight? Theoretically, yes. On a personal level, it's up to you. I don't know whether I would really counsel you to stay and fight, but maybe that's just because it would be better for us if you didn't. But I don't know. That is a tall order, but it's worth thinking about. It's an interesting concept. Think about it, but think about it on your own time because it's nearly 10 o'clock, and we'll be transitioning over to our few minutes here. We actually have a rather extended time period blocked aside for Mark Gersh to join us from the NCEC, and I thought maybe now would be a good time for us. Are you familiar with the NCEC? Because you can make yourself fairly easily familiar with it. National Committee for an Effective Congress. I've got their backgrounder. Actually, longtime player in Washington, D.C. Founded in 1948, as a matter of fact, by, anyone? Trivia? Eleanor Roosevelt and her friends to help elect progressive candidates to the United States Congress, which is a great idea. James Roosevelt, her son, served as the NCEC's first chairman. So I've got their backgrounder here, like I said. Throughout our history, the NCEC played an important role in confronting McCarthyism in the 1950s. Dangerous stuff. That, as well as passing the first campaign finance reform in the early 1970s. And Dick Cheney, I guess, has been dedicated to their destruction ever since. With the help of small dollar donors across the country, that would be you guys. If you guys have some small dollars, that might be one place you want to park them. The NCEC contributes valuable campaign analysis and planning tools to progressive candidates. That's what keeps them, I think, in the category of workhorse versus show horse, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Their little description of what we do. The NCEC has been a stalwart supporter of progressive candidates since our founding. In the beginning, we supported candidates in a more traditional capacity with financial help. We all understand that. But now the committee has evolved to support candidates and campaigns with data and analysis used to develop campaign strategies. And so, let me bring in our call here and welcome Mark Gersh to the show. Mark, hi.
Yes, good morning.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine today.
Very good. Thanks for joining us.
It is my pleasure.
Yeah, I mentioned to Michael, who was helping us arrange the call today. I don't know if that got back to you. I believe I met you at one point, I guess probably back in the early 1990s when you guys were on 2nd Street Northeast, I think. Are you still there?
That's probably right. And at least you didn't say 1960s or 70s, which would have really aged
right.
me.
Well, I wouldn't have had much to say at that point, I think.
Yeah, I understand. Yes.
But behind Steve Rabinowitz's operation, I believe.
Oh, I hope we meet again.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, now we've got this. And this format, I know that you've been active in writing on. I follow your recent articles in front of me, and gerrymandering and its impact on the makeup of Congress. I know on your radar, And but I've been particularly interested in. I was surprised to find out how much thinking you've been doing about the impact of Donald Trump on the election. I guess no one can avoid it, but I know the NCEC work traditionally. I thought, well, they might be focused more on the data, the numbers, the number crunching at the congressional district level. But I guess Trump is such just an amazing force to be reckoned with, not necessarily because he can actually carry an election, but because he has the capacity to destroy everything we know about elections. I guess.
Well, we're not sure of that yet. It's a very interesting concept,
Yeah.
And I'm sure after the election we'll have a fascinating year analyzing all of this.
Oh, yeah.
The impact on this election with Trump is still uncertain. I agree he's going to upset the political map. In other words, try to compete in states like Ohio and Minnesota and even Pennsylvania, and perhaps is going to lose North Carolina. That Republicans, I don't think, have much of a chance of winning 270 electoral votes without North Carolina, and he may be less than 50-50 in Florida, and who knows, Arizona and Georgia could even be in play. So he's definitely upset the national political map. The impact on House races is still a little bit more uncertain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that has something to do with the other issue I just mentioned. It was the gerrymandering has created districts that are so either overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democratic that it's awfully difficult, even with a disaster at the top of the ticket, to guarantee any sort of particular result in these places. People may turn away from the Republican candidate at the top of the ticket, but what happens down ticket, I know that's your specialty.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And yes, gerrymandering has a huge impact on this election. For example, if the House vote, if the national popular House vote, which is somewhat akin to what we look at in terms of the generic vote right now, ended up anywhere close to 50-50, the Democratic Party's chances of making substantial gains in the House are diminished. If the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump race is close, and for example, Clinton defeated Trump by 3.5 points, it still would probably have a limited impact, although in certain districts it would, but in creating the environment for a Democratic takeover, which of course requires 30 seats. And we have states, for example, Ohio, obviously one of the close states in the country. Republicans have never won the White House without carrying Ohio. Mm-hmm. But because of the partisan redistricting that, by the way, was signed into law by John Kasich, there is almost no chance. There's one district in Ohio, I think, in a big Clinton victory might go Democratic in the Cleveland suburbs. But other than that, virtually no chance. Florida, until the redistricting lawsuit that took a few years to resolve itself, that created a few more opportunities, that was overwhelmingly Republican. That was 50-50. Now, I must be fair about this. Democrats have been involved in gerrymandering, including myself, in the past, sure, when the odds favored us in given states. We have the governorship and both houses of the legislature, but clearly right now, if Hillary Clinton wins this election by, as I said, the 2 to 3 point margin, she'll probably carry 190 to 200 congressional districts, and Donald Trump would carry the majority. We saw that in the 2000 election when Al Gore won the majority of the popular vote, but carried 30 or so fewer districts than George W. Bush.
And I know, well, I guess when we're talking about Hillary Clinton winning by 2 or 3 points, so of course we're talking about nationally in the popular vote, as opposed to the strange mechanics that become involved when we divvy things up into electoral votes. But I'm just, again, looking down the column of recent articles. That brings me to the one here. Gerrymandering widens the gap between the popular vote and control of Congress. And I guess that's where we're really be looking at. If there is a considerable, I guess what we'll, for lack of a better term, call landslide victory for Hillary Clinton, even so, it doesn't look like it's all that easy to imagine that being reflected in the congressional numbers. What does a wave election even look like in the House for Democrats? Is this
It would enable us to make substantial gains. If it was a wave election on the order of Barack Obama's 7% national popular vote victory in 2008 when the Democrats gained 20 seats, but from a stronger position starting off, actually, there would be substantial gains. I don't think it would reach the 30 level unless the margin in the presidential vote was approaching 10%, perhaps even more. And more importantly, perhaps, the national popular vote for the House would have to be at least 5%, probably 6%, to approach a majority. One only has to go back as far as 2012, when the Democrats gained 8 seats in the House, and yet won the majority of the popular vote for the House overall. Now, President Obama's margin over Mitt Romney was smaller than it was over John McCain. In fact, it was about half as big, but it was 3.7%, which was larger actually than the narrative that was coming out of election night. This is such a close election. In terms of the popular vote, it really was not. So there are, now, we have developed paths to victory. In other words, the districts that would be required to win and the limited number we could afford to lose. And I can make the mathematics work in a wave election. But in more practical terms, right now, it is difficult to envisage a Democratic majority, even if Hillary Clinton were to win this race in the 5 to 7% margin. And by the way, David, one reason for that is that there are actually some potentially marginal districts where right now it looks like Donald Trump is not necessarily a liability. I'm primarily talking about rural, small-town districts like the open seat in Michigan's 1st District, the open seat in upstate New York 19, or in Long Island, where Republican incumbent Lee Zeldin, who won the seat over Tim Bishop in 2014, a very marginal seat, but Trump's popularity in Long Island, at least to this point, has not been greatly diminished. Now, will it, as time goes on, if he implodes or continues to make incendiary statements about various groups? It could, because the demographic of white educated people living in the suburbs, which seems to be breaking against Trump, is really where a lot of the potential opportunities exist. So that part of this still has to play out. One more thing I want to add right now is that other concern I've got is that New York and California are nobody's idea of targeted states. And for the Democrats to win the majority of the Congress and the House of Representatives in the next election, they need to score about a net gain of at least approaching 10 seats in those two states. The question will be then, will the Hispanic vote turn out? We hope so. Will other low turnout voters, primarily voters under 35 years old, will they turn out in a state where we know the electoral votes are going to go to Hillary Clinton?
Okay, so those are, yeah. Well, that is interesting. You mentioned, I guess the mention of Long Island has my ears perk up a little bit. And I guess, I don't know how well they do in terms of making Trump any more toxic there. I mean, I guess everybody's familiar, basically, with Donald Trump, and it's not a matter of introducing him to the voters and getting them to take note of how toxic he is. They've lived in the shadow of Donald Trump and his fabulism for a long, long time, and it still hasn't done much.
I'm a little hopeful on that because I think a lot of low information voters are not paying attention to the election yet, and so people who might be inclined to think he's a successful businessman, a native New Yorker, and think he's charismatic, as they pay closer attention to this, that could change there, and we're still hopeful that Long Island will produce us a net gain of 1 seat and enable us to hold on to the seat in the 3rd district where a very popular incumbent, Steve Israel, decided not to run for re-election.
Yes. Well, okay, yeah, that's certainly in keeping with our traditional understanding of how the election dynamics work, despite the fact that Trump seems to be turning everything else upside down. The idea of not paying particularly close attention until after the close of the summer, we're familiar with that one. That would be amazing if that holds. Considering
Let me throw some statistics at you that give me hope. In the last 2 presidential elections, we've scored a net gain of 28 seats. In the last 2 midterm elections, we've lost almost 80 seats. This is a presidential election. The turnout's going to be better. The growth in Hispanics, and also an underrated fact that people tend to pay less attention to the percentage growth of Asian American voters and the fact that they're moving more in the Democratic column, that could cause the non-white element of the election to get closer to 30%. There's various disagreements between the Census Bureau data and the exit poll data as to what the actual non-white share of the 12 and 8 elections were. One thing that's indisputable, though, it is growing and the white vote is declining. And that is another factor that Trump may have the stronger support among some non-college educated white males that may help him in a state like Pennsylvania. But in a lot of other places where there are very close House races, it could create the environment for the Democrats to gain seats.
Yeah, now that you mention it too, I feel bad about having neglected that point, but I think the most frequent mention of the Asian American voting sector on the show comes from mentions of, hey, don't forget this growing sector of the voting demographic. Every time it comes up, it's about how we are neglecting to discuss it, and I have not changed that yet. So I'm glad you brought that up one more time so that we can keep that on our radar.
And watch California 39 and 49. Those are two districts in Southern California held by Republican incumbents that are not on a lot of people's radar screens. And in those, especially in 49, it's not the Hispanic vote as much, because that's only 17% of the citizen voting age population in the district. But the Asian percentage in some of these districts in California is approaching 20%. So it's a sleeper in a lot of places that people are not paying as much attention to. Even in Washington State, which has a relatively high percentage of Asian Americans, we don't know if there's enough of a vote to make a difference in a potentially marginal district, Washington 8 in the King County, Seattle area, where there is a very viable Republican incumbent, regrettably. But and again, in a huge disparity election like this one could be, or even in a future election, that could become more of a factor and will become more of a factor in districts as they go on. And the Asian vote, as I'm sure you know, is not as concentrated in specific areas as the African American and Latino voters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so I guess it makes it a little bit more difficult to target in the same ways, but certainly deserving of more attention from us. Okay. I'm also looking down the list here, and you made mention of the fact that, of course, one of the things that gives you optimism for the coming election is, of course, because it's a presidential election, we tend to do better there. But I know that we also tend to lose ground, particularly if there's a Democratic president in midterms. Any thought at this point, is it even possible to begin thinking about how to deal with that sort of that drop off in voting and the backsliding that we tend to do? Or are we just on this constant yo-yo cycle here? Or does this year's presidential primary on the Democratic side, having involved potentially Democratic-leaning voters or straying Democrats who were identifying as Democrat but somehow becoming less interested in the election, people who've been excited by Bernie Sanders, perhaps, do we get anywhere with maintaining any gains that we make in the presidential year midterm, or is that just impossible to tell at this point?
That's actually an incredibly important question, and I'm so happy you brought that up. I am very frustrated by that trend, and there's a real irony here. As the Democratic fortunes in presidential elections has improved, they have lost ground in midterms, and the problem is, with the exception of North Carolina, all our larger states where there are more congressional districts hold their midterm gubernatorial election in midterm election years, not presidential election years. And yes, it has been the proclivity of voters to accrue losses on the party that has won the White House or holds the White House at the time of the midterm election. So here is one panacea for that, and I've mentioned this to a lot of the groups, like the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, the labor unions we work with, other groups, about how our strategy should be a little bit different. Florida and Virginia redistricting lawsuits have proven that generally if this gets to the courts, even courts that may not necessarily have a Democratic majority in the judicial appointments, they've been on our side because the Republicans have often overreached or violated certain state laws. So I think what we have to do is figure out how to just win one of the three placeholders at the redistricting table. Perhaps we win the governorship and realize we can't win the legislature back. Perhaps the lower house is winnable, the upper house is not, and the gubernatorial election is not. If we get into a stalemate like that, more often than not, partisan gerrymanders will end up in the hands of the courts. And the courts gave us a pretty fair shake. I mean, for example, even in terms of this election in 2016, the Democrats have a 30-seat disadvantage. Well, they've already won 2 seats because we're definitely going to pick up the 4th district in Virginia, and the 10th district in Florida and the 13th district in Florida. We're probably losing the 2nd district in Florida, all because of post-2014 redistricting. And we were close to getting a similar fair shake in North Carolina, but the Republican answer to a lawsuit was a fairly, I must admit, adept map redraw that fit the criteria that the courts had asked for. So I believe that, for example, let's talk about Ohio, where we're barely underrepresented. Well, John Kasich's not going to run for a 3rd term. We may not be able to win the Ohio House and Senate back. I'm not sure of that, but it's going to be difficult. But we have every opportunity to elect a Democratic governor in 2018. I mean, Ted Strickland was first elected in a midterm, and he almost beat John Kasich in the 2010 Republican landslide because he was popular with all groups in the Democratic Party. So I have hopes that in Florida, in Ohio, and the re-election of the Democratic governor in Pennsylvania, Wolf, we will have more representation in this fight than we've had in previous years.
Well, that's a terrific brass tacks strategy. It seems so hopeless sometimes looking at, in particular, some of these states and thinking redistricting, and I think of it always in terms of the legislature, and some of these legislatures, it seems like, well, Democrats are more or less locked out of their chances for winning majorities, certainly in both houses, and in some cases even one. But I see that there's an opening almost everywhere just to knock out one leg of the stool of redistricting, and if we can, so that's interesting and an attainable goal. If we can create that sort of tension and deadlock and have it default to the courts, we're doing well there. That's brilliant.
I totally agree, and I'll throw another one at you, and that is New York State, where the possibility of winning the state Senate back this year and re-electing Andrew Cuomo or another Democratic candidate who might be running for governor in 2018 would potentially enable us to offset some gerrymandering losses in other states. I mean, we have a majority of the Democratic delegation right now, and without trying to contradict myself and be a big advocate for gerrymandering, after attacking the vagaries of it, I guess I'll say it's kind of like we can't have unilateral disarmament. As long as they're doing it, we have to do it, or else we're a hopeless majority. So there's a lot of openings. The only place where I'm somewhat pessimistic about is Texas, and even there, one never knows. There's a possibility in the state Senate. I don't know how popular Governor Abbott will be in 2018. He's very popular right now, I believe, and that one may be difficult. But on the other hand, well, of course, California went to a commission system and produced a map that not only enabled us to win more seats, but even more importantly, what California did, and it's mentioned in my article online, was it created competitive seats. And I think a competitive environment is not only healthy for Democrats and progressives, but very healthy for the country at large. And California, we almost lost 5 races in the last midterm election, but we hung on and won them. There are districts that Republicans can win out there with moderate mainstream candidates. But there are also opportunities for the Democrats to win 70-75% of the entire delegation. So the process, if you look at the process where there is more of a nonpartisan element, Iowa is another one, that doesn't necessarily give you more Democratic seats. I mean, right now, the Republicans have 3 of the 4 seats in Iowa, but 3 of the 4 are competitive, and Democrats will probably win 1 or 2 of them back this year. So it really accomplishes both purposes, helps progressives, and also kind of limits the perversion to democracy that gerrymandering really represents.
I think then a good place for us to be landing, especially it helps us resolve the at least apparent hypocrisy that you were discussing of saying, well, okay, gerrymandering can certainly pervert the results. Yet the maps have to be drawn, and they have to be drawn by someone. Better that they be drawn by us. And if you can, of course, approach the redistricting question from this slightly different angle of, well, let's benefit the party that where it's possible to control the process, sure, but designing things so that at least the seats have some element of competition involved. I mean, that keeps everybody, one, honest, but on their toes and doing their best in every election to make sure that they can compete. That's helpful long term, not only for the candidates but for the party nationally. There's certainly plenty of benefits to keeping things that way. Another, I guess, slight shift of topic. Again, looking down the line at your articles, different topic, but came to mind when I was talking about the Democratic primary this time around. Open versus closed primaries. You've got a piece here, a big influence going forward. What was your thinking on that as an issue of controversy during the campaign, and now that the party platform committees are meeting, and they'll be talking going forward in the meetings to come at the DNC about how to approach the way we do our presidential primaries? Where are you on that?
Well, it's a more complex issue, and I want to give you a carefully thought out answer.
I'll take it.
And I share a lot of your objectives and of your listeners. I mean, but for me, the choice between Sanders and Clinton was Sanders. On the other hand, when we have open primaries, what we do is we neutralize the toxic impact of the radical right. In other words, it will eventually, it would give more moderate Republicans a opportunity to be the nominee. Now, of course, one can argue if you're on the other side, in a marginal district, you want to run against a more conservative, unelectable candidate. Conversely, an open primary may make it a little bit more difficult in some cases for the most liberal, progressive, whatever term you want to use, and I don't like those terms myself, candidate to win the primaries. So it's something of a mixed bag in a way, but I think in terms of our democracy and in terms of maximizing the number of seats the Democratic Party can win, that's why I wrote that, and that's why I am more an advocate of a certain kind of open primary. There are hybrid systems. I mean, New Jersey, for example, allows you, I believe, to register with one party the day of the election, and that's why New Jersey partisan registration doesn't really reflect the voting behavior as much as one would think it might. In a lot of states, actually, registration is a very misleading indicator of how people are going to vote. So that's a very complicated issue. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. For example, in Florida 10 this year, you have a district that again was changed as a result of the successful redistricting lawsuit. It's a district in the Orlando area that will definitely go Democratic. But you've got Val Demings, who's an African American police chief who almost won a much less favorable district for Democrats in the general election in 2012. She was the perceived front runner, but you have two candidates, an African-American state senator and the former state chairman, a Caucasian man, I believe his name is Bob Poe, who is a leader of the more liberal element in that area. Now, any of the three is going to win the general election. So in this case, it really doesn't even matter that much who wins the primary. But in other cases, that would be an interesting dichotomy of what is going to happen. Running to the left, running to the right, trying to win a primary. I mean, there are districts now where we have the nominees in most districts where I think that the person who won the primary on both sides was perhaps not as strong a candidate as some of the defeated candidates were. But we'll have to see how that plays out. But don't forget, all these things are against the backdrop of a midterm election, at least half the time, where the African American, Latino, and Asian vote is going to be lower than it is in a presidential election. And in fact, I don't know whether this is a turnout issue or a persuasion issue, but it's fascinating to me that not only did the share of Hispanic voters go down in 2014 and 2012 to 2012, but the percentage voting Democratic seems to have dropped from 71% to 63%, if you can believe the numbers of exit polls. And I know that they're subject to a margin of error, but clearly something was happening in terms of which Latino voters turned out. And I think it's probably a fact that a lot of the younger ones are the ones who declined to vote in the midterm election. So that's an incredibly important and complex issue that one can argue a couple of different sides of.
Yeah, well, now as you describe it, I'm beginning to wonder: is it a mistake to conclude one way or the other about a preference for open versus closed primaries, or I guess some of the hybrid versions, based on the presidential election? Is it going to come back to haunt you in midterms? Is it better in terms of midterms? Does it have no influence? I can well imagine that even with an open primary, say during midterm elections, the idea of turning out for or engaging the lost voters in primary elections for midterm congressional seats, and it's not even always there's sometimes not any competition at all in a lot of these seats, and I can't imagine it making a big difference. But is that a decision we want to make with midterms in mind at all, or is it solely about presidential years?
Well, I think it's about both, but unfortunately, I don't think that system's going to change anytime soon.
Okay.
So in that respect, I wrote the piece in terms of just putting the issue out there rather than urging immediate action, as much as I feel the strategy for legislative races and gubernatorial elections in 2018 presents for us. So it requires a little bit more thought, and it may even differ from state to state.
Yeah, I can see how it would be extraordinarily complex, and I guess that argues for not necessarily rushing headlong in and attempting to settle it one way or the other right here, right now in Philadelphia. And I imagine that's probably part of the reason why the larger part, I think, of the DNC rank and file not particularly interested in pushing radical change on that. And of course, a lot of it is not really controlled at the DNC level anyway, open versus closed primaries. But I know that there'll be, say, Sanders delegates who have come with ideas in mind and proposals in hand for pushing for that at the convention level, or at least, I guess, having the opportunity to vote for I guess what would be the equivalent of a sense of the Congress resolution, some sort of putting the DNC on record as at least being interested in looking at the question. But they won't really be solving it this year at this meeting of the delegates.
Well, I want to cast as positive a light as possible on the overall political situation as we enter a general election with the parties making an effort to unify. But it's pretty easy to see that the Democratic National Committee itself, as opposed to the DCCC and the DSEC, is pretty much a presidential-centric organization. I'm not even sure to what extent these considerations are given a lot of thought up there. And I'm not being critical here. I'm just stating the obvious.
Yes. Well, okay. It's worth reminding everybody what's the job of the DNC at this stage. What are they meeting to do? That the work of electing members of Congress really lies mostly elsewhere in other campaign committees. And as I've found, it's also worth reminding people when those races come around, particularly when we find people complaining about the way the DCCC approaches either, candidate recruitment or or their red to blue lists and things of that nature, that it's worth reminding everybody that is a constituent service, not in the sense of you and I as voters' constituent service, but constituents of DCCC are the members of Congress and the incumbents. It really is about preserving their ability to win their seats back and then expand the playing field where Republicans hold the seats where there are open seats. But it's not a grassroots-oriented organization. And
let me partially disagree with you there, because I've worked with the DCCC. Maybe my statement, but the DNC needs to be clarified. I've worked for the DCCC closely as a consultant for many years. There is no organization I've ever seen that tries to be more pragmatic about the decision-making on putting districts in play and trying to recruit the right candidate and just trying to create a House majority in the DCCC. They do a marvelous job of that. I know there's a lot of criticism of them, and I welcome this opportunity or any future opportunity to discuss exactly what I know about the decision-making there that I've participated in over the years. And my statement about the DNC, in a way, I got to tell you, was not as benign as you might think. I've been around this a long time, and I remember in 1996, when it was fairly obvious to all that Bill Clinton was going to be reelected, it was only the majority that he would win that was at stake. And I, at that time, was actually a staff member to the minority leader of the House, Dick Gephardt, who in a lot of ways, to me, was the finest public servant I ever knew. And we had a chance, particularly early on, with all the changes Newt Gingrich was trying to make in the budget and whatever else, to gain the majority back. And we would have been closer if not for that financial scandal that was a mini scandal that impacted the presidential election late in the game. And I wouldn't necessarily say there was tremendous support for the as much as there should have been, given the fact that the presidential election was already decided. Now, this year, where there's more uncertainty, although I think Clinton's the favorite, it's a little bit of a different situation. So I'm not being critical of them so much as just suggesting that, in my view, from the idealistic standpoint, I would like to build toward a Democratic National Committee that cared about all elements of the party, from president down to dog catcher, if there was a party selection for dog catcher.
All right, and I guess those days are over. But yes. Certainly the idea of, and I think you'll find a lot of agreement and support, certainly among the listenership here. They've always been more interested in finding ways of involving the national party in those state level and local level races, and it feels like it's a sort of a distant organization at the moment. Let me ask you also about, I know you mentioned a couple of the experiences you've had working with DCCC, with Dick Gephardt, and I know there's another item on your resume going even further back that occasionally we bring up here and discuss. I worked on the Hill a couple of years briefly, also in the early to mid-'90s, and so saw the disappearance and dissolution of the DSG, the Democratic Study Group. And I know that's on your resume, and I keep harping on that every once in a while when I talk about. I thought that was just such an amazing thing. We didn't know how good we had it when they were operating, and one of the chief benefits, I thought, really a stealthy benefit of it, was that the DSG had been founded with very progressive members behind it and very progressive goals in mind, and yet never really invoked, to my knowledge, at least in those latter days, that label for itself, but that the entirety of the Democratic caucus, and at the time even a lot of Republican members, relied on the DSG solely for its the schedule and the basic analysis of bills that were coming to the floor. But the idea of having an entire Democratic caucus get their analysis of everything that was coming up with a progressive bent that didn't state it as such, I thought was enormously valuable in unifying party votes behind more progressive positions, and that sort of, it seemed to me, fall apart with the successor. I mean, and here I'm just talking about those DSG daily and weekly reports that we had to sort of, they sort of jury-rigged up a new system to provide that information, but it wasn't coming from the same place. I don't know if you felt the same way about that as a loss, and whether you felt like that had anything to do with, it seemed like progressives were at a loss and we were a bit in the wilderness by late 1990s, and that the Democratic caucus began to follow the lead of a slightly more, I guess for lack of a better term, conservative bent in policy making. But does that ring true to you at all, or?
DSG to me was like family. That's where I started out after college. Dick Conlon, the executive director at the time, the man who hired me, unsung hero in American history for all the goals that were accomplished. Phil Burton, who I also had the pleasure of working for after my DSG days, where I first met Leader Pelosi, who then became a successor to Phil Burton's wife in the Congress. They were icons. They were liberal icons, and what they did to basically purify, if I can use that word, Democratic Party about making it institutionally democratic. In other words, at one time, as you remember, I'm sure, David, committee votes were not made public. The seniority system absolutely controlled everything in terms of the House committee chairs to such an extent that we had people in committee chairmanships like Ed Hebert, Wayne Hayes, who in no way reflected the will of the Democratic Party, either in the House or in the country. The DSG at that time was even somewhat resented by the party leadership. I guess that was Carl Albert and others, although I think they read our weekly fact sheets and reports as much as anybody else did. It was a struggle. And I believe the history of this, I was long gone by then, is that the Republicans knew how influential and important the DSG was, and I believe Newt Gingrich, when he came to power in 1995, effectively defunded it and removed it from the Longworth building, where we were situated, which was a testament to the greatness of the DSG, because the Republicans had similar committees, although the House Republican Conference, especially under John Anderson, was a more moderate Republican, did some of the same things the DSG did. But the DSG was not only, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the DSG was not only a entity of legislative research. The DSG Campaign Fund was one of the early pioneers of getting more progressives elected to Congress, because at that time the DCCC, unlike how it is now, was totally an incumbent service organization. I don't even think they studied which districts might be able to be won in the next election, but the DSG under Dick Conlon did, and that's where I broke in as a person who was an election analyst and somebody who was paying attention to marginal races. We ended up sharing our information with partners like the AFL-CIO and others, and we actually, I think, had some influence with them, especially in the George Meany days, of backing progressive candidates who were totally on their side on all domestic issues, but maybe were sort of shunned because of opposition to the Vietnam War. I mean, Phil Burton voted against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, I remember. It was incredible what an underrated and important element in progressive politics that the DSG represented. We worked 24/7. I used to walk home to my apartment in Southwest Washington when it was already daylight the next day after these fact sheets were put out.
They really were tremendous resources, and I felt that, I mean, having been there on the Hill when it was defunded and dissolved, I mean, people just showing up to work in Democratic offices saying, really don't even know how to approach the day from this point on. If my DSG report doesn't show up, I don't have any idea what's happening on the floor today, and it was a very awkward time. But Gingrich certainly knew exactly what he was doing in defunding it, and it felt like a huge loss. But I think the history of it would make a very good book someday. I
think John Lawrence, who used to work for George Miller, was one of Phil Burton's proteges and one of the leaders of the progressive movement in Congress, and regrettably decided to retire in 2014. I think he's writing something about this now.
Okay. Well, I'll keep an eye out for that. But, that's I think would be well worth reading for people who either came of political age afterwards or just never really had any serious exposure to the DSG, or who, I know of a couple of people who have come to work on the Hill, and they get things that take the same form and use the same format as what were the DSG reports and say, I can't see what you're talking about. It doesn't make any sense to me as a guiding light. And it's written outside, and I think more or less outsourced, not really done by the same sort of people or with the same intention, and I don't think they know what they're missing there. But
not even close.
Right.
The DSG is an irreplaceable entity in American history.
Yeah. I spent some time in trying to discuss that with people. Spent some time in the Library of Congress a few years back, just looking through archived boxes from stored there by congressmen who had Democratic congressmen who had retired since and left their papers behind, and a lot of those boxes were just stuffed with the old DSG reports and not organized in any way yet.
Can I give you an anecdotal answer about some of the esoteric things we would do and how important it was? In those days, we did not have the internet, we did not have Wikipedia, other elements of garnering information. When Dick Conlon, the executive director of DSG, and the chairman at that time, Phil Burton, decided on an all-out assault on the seniority system and and also just clarifying, enlightening people what was going on in committees, which often were more important than the full House in determining the legislative changes. He sent me to the Library of Congress stacks to review every congressional directory back to the late 1700s and early 1800s so we could put together a historical paper on seniority and how it was done in the old days, the ratios between Democrats and Republicans, the subcommittee system where the committee chairman could also chair subcommittees, and that's how I got kind of my interest in statistics as a way of using actual information, quantifiable data to affect real change. And I probably spent 6 months in the stacks of the Library of Congress off and on doing this, and eventually I emerged with the knowing that my 2020 vision no longer existed.
Yeah, well, that'll take it out of you. But yeah, that's that is interesting. The dedication to just the data gathering, which I guess has stuck to you to this day. Very important organization. Can't believe the influence of it is lost, but the history does exist there. I look forward to hearing something about this book coming out. But I suppose the information gathering and dissemination would be easier. That portion of recreating something, if that were ever a goal that we could organize behind and fund in some way, would be less daunting. It's an amazing thing that they built in the day when there really was no mass communication tool available in the same way. Although they had it wasn't a mass communication format necessarily, but speaking to a rather otherwise disorganized Democratic caucus and unifying them on policy positions without even, to me, it seemed like it wasn't, it didn't even have that as an overt goal. It's just people landed there because that's the information that they got. That was the most comprehensive information available on bills, committee activity, and what was going to be on the floor. That was the go-to place. Tremendous loss to have done that. But, well, thanks for sharing that with me. I know at some point we have to let you get back to the actual work that you're doing today. But I appreciate your coming by and spending so much time with us today.
Almost my pleasure. I really enjoyed this.
I hope we can do it again sometime. And as we get closer to the election, might be a good idea to see if we can't hook David Neer in as well and talk a little bit about the granular knowledge both of you have got of the races in House districts to come.
Okay, I'll be happy to.
Thanks again, and I appreciate your coming by and spending so much time, and we will try and do it again. Thank you.
All right.
Mark Gersh, Executive Director of the National Committee for an Effective Congress, been with us for the past 45 minutes. Thanks again. Take care. All right. So, wow, we got into a little bit more detail on. I really would like to spend that same 45 minutes one of these days with more anecdotes from the DSG days. I can't stress enough how important I think it was, but it would be more. Will certainly be better for those of you listening to hear it straight from the folks who were on the ground producing the stuff than from, well, I was a rather junior staffer and only for a couple of years there, but the kind of impression that the DSG's work and history made on me then stuck with me to this day. And sometimes I wonder, it's good to check with them. Am I just clinging to it as a hope for organizing the Democratic caucus for progressive policy making in the future just because I don't know what else to do? Is it a false panacea, or is there something to it? So it was good to hear from Mark about that. And he certainly sounded like it rang true to him in terms of the value of the organization, and also bringing up the work that the DSG did in trying to reform caucus rules internally with respect to chairmanships of committees and the seniority system. That comes up from time to time, too, in our discussions. And so getting down to the brass tacks of these things and the procedural issues, both, inside the House Democratic Caucus, inside the DNC, inside the campaign committees, and the way they work together. I don't know. I can't stress enough, and I don't think I have ever slacked in that, and stressing the importance of procedure and rule making and the way we steer the work that we do behind the scenes in these organizations. So I suppose at least we haven't let our guard down on that one. Okay. Well, very interesting. Thanks so much again, Mark, for spending so much time with us. Let's wrap up for the day and see if there's anything. I'll check back with Pocket. Where do we need to go in order to keep you current before handing things over to the guys on the after show? They'll always keep you current with the top headlines, of course. So no worries about that. But I don't want to leave all of it to them. We have to give them room to indulge some of the esoterica as well. Let's see. So what have I picked up on in the last 24 hours in terms of bits and pieces to finish up today's show? Here's one from the gun fail front. This one surprised me, despite the fact that I've been watching this stuff for so long and so closely. This one snuck up on me. I wonder if there's going to be some. Yeah, there's probably an auto player in this one. Local news station WHNT down in Alabama. Oh, wow. Thanks for not auto playing on me. Here's the headline. 3 North Alabama counties rank highest in accidental shooting deaths. And that might not surprise you, generally speaking. I mean, certainly if you ask me where are the counties that lead the country in accidental shooting deaths, I'd have said the Old South, and Alabama counts. But Alabama as a state, it wouldn't have come to mind as tops. I would have said Florida. I would have said Georgia. Tennessee, I think, is in contention there. But so Alabama surprises me. So datelined here, Tuscumbia, which I'm probably mispronouncing, and not just because I don't speak Southern. Tuscumbia, Alabama. Colbert County would not have been my guess, even if you had said, no, it's Alabama. I wouldn't have picked Colbert out of a hat. Has reached the top of a ranking that no one would ever want to be on. Over a 15-year period, police saw more accidental shooting deaths than anyone in the country. So that really did surprise me. It should probably be an eye-opener, said Tuscumbia Police Chief Tony Logan. Probably. I think he's got it right there. The numbers are not too staggering, but they're still disturbing, Logan added. And remember, we're still talking about, relatively speaking, when it comes to accidental gun deaths, the numbers aren't that impressive. And that's the reason why you find a lot of gun enthusiasts and gun rights advocates saying, it's a tiny percentage, it's a drop in the bucket or whatever. And they say about kids, only about 60 a year accidentally killed under the age of 14. Truth is, it's about twice that. But even so, I guess statistically speaking, it's horrible to think about 100 plus kids under the age of 14 accidentally shot to death each year. It is ridiculous, but I guess in the cold, hard light of statistical analysis, it's not a lot of people, and neither is the 500 to 600 of all ages accidentally killed by firearms each year. So, yes, the numbers aren't that staggering, but it is still disturbing, and why do you want to be at the top of that list? You don't, obviously, but I guess overall, I would say still no surprise that the tops of the list come from the Deep South, where the gun culture is that much more prevalent. Certainly, there's some possibility that certain places in Ohio or even Michigan, another rather accomplished gun fail state in the north, could be in contention. So what are those not too staggering numbers? Between 1999 and 2014, the Centers for Disease Control shows 22 people in Colbert County, which is not huge, right? In terms of population, we should check that out. I'm curious about what Wikipedia says about that one. And do they say Colbert County? Probably not. But what's the demographic? What's the population, I guess? The whole county, 54,520. What's in Colbert County? Well, Tuscumbia is the county seat, but does that ring a bell for anybody? Unless you're from Alabama, probably not. Muscle Shoals, though, that's different. I do see some occurrence of gun fail there. Sheffield, Layton, Littleville, and Cherokee, the other, I guess, top cities in the county anyway. So let's see what's going on there. 22 people in Colbert County died from accidental gunshots. That's more per capita. That's how we do it. Than any other county in the nation. It factored out suicide, it factored out homicide, and it dealt strictly with accidental death. Stated Logan, this tells me we probably need to do a better job as far as training of civilians. Very interesting. Very true. Chief Logan emphasizes training for any person who owns a firearm. Good idea. Even if they have had one for years. True enough. He said the biggest cause for accidental shootings is mishandling them. That is some detective work there, Chief. They are, after all, deadly weapons. Humans by nature are curious. And when you see a firearm sitting there, the natural curiosity is to want to pick it up and look at it. Logan explained, you need to make sure that anytime you have a firearm that is accessible like that, it is rendered safe. Logan said gun locks are one of the best purchases a gun owner can make, and always keep them out of reach of children. By the way, very often they will make it, how good a purchase can it be for a gun owner? People will make it for free for you. Police and sheriff's organizations very frequently give out gun locks for free. Unfortunately, they tend to do that when a local child accidentally shoots themselves and sometimes lives, sometimes dies, and that motivates them to say, oh yeah, we should be doing that. Of course, up in Philadelphia, we know about Scott Charles and his program there. Anytime, any place, you got a gun, you want to show up, get a lock, you can do it. As a matter of fact, longtime listener J.S. Poupard notes today that retweeting Metro Philly, there is a story about Scott Charles in there with a nice photo too, and he'll tell you all about that program. I did retweet it. We'll include it in the roundup today. If you're anywhere in the area, or let's say you're traveling there for some reason, Philadelphia, anytime soon, say this summer, stop in, I guess. Don't bring your gun with you, but I guess if you've got a gun and you need a lock and you've spent all your money, say, on tickets to Philadelphia, you can still pick one up. So there you have it. By the way, Colbert County, not the only North Alabama county to make the list. North Alabama. According to the CDC, DeKalb and Marshall counties. And if you said DeKalb to me, I'd say Georgia. But DeKalb County, Alabama, and Marshall County ranked second and third among accidental shooting deaths. Madison County came in seventh for accidental shooting deaths during the same reporting period. What does that mean? First place, second place, third place, seventh place, all Alabama. Really? That is rather amazing. I mean, I really don't... I guess they just have extraordinarily good/bad aim with the gun accidents, because I really wouldn't have put Alabama at the top of gun fail. And I guess it's just because I see all kinds of accidents, fatal and otherwise, and Alabama wouldn't be at the top of my list. But man, when they shoot themselves, they really shoot themselves in Northwest Alabama. Amazing. Okay, let's see. Anything else that I really need to squeeze in? Because it's really almost about time to wrap it up and hand it over to the after show. I didn't get, once again, back to poor Roger Ailes, beset by complaints from the whining Gretchen Carlson, as they're now saying. By the way, apparently they've geared up the Fox News machine to attack Gretchen Carlson and her allegations. So, standard play on, well, any problem that's raised by anybody, but in particular, sexual harassment charges. That's straight out of the standard playbook on that one. So, no surprises there. Well, okay. So I guess we stand by, and the big news coming up next would be watching for the political events of the day mentioned by Greg, in particular, the joint appearances by Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and then down in Dallas, the events today, and see if anything emanates, I guess, for lack of a better term, from the Trump camp today. All right, so let's turn things over. Not quite time for the outro music yet, but let's get ready and take a look at what's coming up on the after show and make sure that we have, enough time to actually read the carefully prepared summaries that Justice sends me every day. Blew it on that one yesterday, but they seem to get on. Oh, look at this. So today I finally take a look, and guess what happens? No after show today. Why no after show today? I will tell you. The crew is preparing for Getaway Day tomorrow for Netroots Nation 2016. In place of the after show, they'll have a session of Open Court and State of Affairs, a free-form selection of music, mixes, and news. It'll be entertaining. By Special Agent DJ Justice. Guess who that is? Of the Justice Department. There will be order, so do stay tuned for that. A little bit of light entertainment for your day. How about those of you, or the rest of you, preparing to make your way to Netroots Nation? I am unfortunately missing it again. But hey, I'll be here to entertain you, and it won't have to be on Pacific Coast time either. So, looking forward to dispatches from you. Oh, by the way, let me just encourage you then. Those of you who are going, now would be a great time for you to fire up the smartphone and tell us a little bit about what's going on, what you're seeing. Describe the session that you attend, one of the keynote addresses. Take a little background recording. Let the noise be in the background. I thought that was one of the most exciting things about broadcasting from Netroots Nation that one time. Why don't you do it too and email it to me? We'll share it on the air.
From Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So how about that? After all the build-up about my responsibility to the guys on the after show, there will be one today, but there will be later on, and the amount of special programming coming up during Netroots Nation, unbelievable. This is the place to be. Where else would you listen to what's going on at Netroots Nation than Netroots Radio? Keep it here all day long.